Good morning. My name is Tom Perks. I'm with the staff of OFA, and I'd like to welcome you to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, OFA's Farm Transition Planning webinar. The past month, we've been holding a series of workshops across the province for members to attend and learn more about farm financial planning for succession and transition in their farm operations. The reason why we've done this is certainly statistics released by Stats Canada have shown that many Canadian farmers do not feel that they have a written succession plan. In fact, the 2016 Census of Agriculture showed that less than 10% of Canadian farmers felt that they had a written succession plan for their farm operation. In 2021, in the most recent census, that figure increased to 12.4%, which is progress, but still shows a real need to have more succession planning completed for farm families, not only in Ontario, but in Canada. OFA has also completed surveys on this topic with our members, and the most recent survey that we did showed that 40% of respondents, less than 40% of the respondents, showed that they did not have a written succession plan for their farm too. So OFA is pleased to partner with Farm Life Financial Planning of Peterborough, Ontario, to prepare and deliver the series of workshops and today's webinar to help, if you haven't started a plan on your farm, to maybe think about doing a plan, or if you have started the process, to continue and hopefully finish that process. So we hope that today's webinar helps you in that regard and helps you and your family frame your thinking. It's a very important process for farm families. Before we get into the actual farm transition planning portion of the webinar, I'd like to mention that OFA as a general farm organization is very concerned about many issues facing rural Ontario and farmers here in our province. So OFA has partnered with federal and provincial governments to develop and deliver a new initiative for rural and farmer mental health, known as the Farmer Wellness Initiative. This has been designed to sort of respond to the increased stresses that farmers and rural Ontarians are facing. When you look at supply chain disruptions, war in Ukraine, the many global factors that are happening in our world today, it's just added to the level of stress on many farms. So this initiative has been developed to try to respond and to provide support for rural Ontario and farmers across the province. So before we get into the webinar, we're going to have a very short video on the Farmer Wellness Initiative.
Forecast showers and thunderstorms today with strong southwesterly winds to 37 miles per hour. We'll have a
It's not working.
Let's break the silence together.
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 Hi, this is Samantha at the Farmer Wellness Initiative. I'm here to help.
Thank you very much, Matt, for showing that video. The toll-free number was shown in the video, and if you know of anyone who could use this program and that type of support, please call the toll-free number. So we want to thank you very much for being OFA members, of course, and participating in today's workshop. As I mentioned, Farm Life Financial Planning is our partner and our presenter today. And they bring specific and extensive expertise in helping farm families to start the discussion, to develop a transition or succession plan for their farms, and help them to continue those operations into the future. So I'm going to introduce Andrew Leach and Daryl Wade from Farm Life Financial Planning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Leach. I'm an advisor here with Farm Life, and I'm joined today by Daryl Wade, the founder of Farm Life. We're here today to talk a little bit about farm succession planning. Over the last couple of weeks, we have been hosting a series of in-person workshops across the province, and today we're glad to be here to present a virtual opportunity to share some of our knowledge and expertise with you guys that weren't able to make it in person. So thanks, everyone, for joining today. Without further ado, we're going to jump into things here, and we're going to do a quick little introduction about who we are and why we do this work for a living. And then from there, we're going to take you through a real-world case study with a farm succession case, just to help you guys see how it unfolds in real time with us today.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning. I'm Daryl Wade, and I grew up the youngest of four on a family farm just east of Toronto. My family, like many others, was involved in dairy and beef, and actually the horse industry as well. And when I was trying to figure out my path into the family farm, our family took a little bit of a turn for the worse when my brother got involved in a bad farming accident. And like many of you, I had my head down trying to fill that gap, fill that void that he left. And only 6 months after my brother's accident, my dad went in for a routine colonoscopy. He accidentally perforated his bowel, and he would die of an embolism a day later. So now we face the consequences of the right things not being discussed or planned for. And like many of you, our family was faced with making some big decisions. And unfortunately, farming was no longer in my future. And my dad's financial advisor created an opportunity for me to get into this industry, which I later made it my own. And I've spent the last 23 years trying to help other farm families avoid some of the mistakes that we've made. Andrew's going to talk a little bit about his story, and then together we'll take you through a process of how we help farm families avoid these what-ifs in planning.
Yeah, my story is a little bit different than Daryl's, and I very much represent the non-farming children when it comes to farm succession. I grew up on a very successful dairy farm in the UK before succession led us here to restarting our farm in Canada. And now that we're going through the succession journey again, as someone that does this for a living and gets to live through it every day, it's very interesting looking at things from the other side of the table for once. So for me, I spend a lot of time focusing on those non-farming children and really bringing the entire family picture together when it comes to succession planning. So the one thing I want to clear up before we go any further is exactly what succession planning is. A lot of people look at succession planning as simply this transition of assets between generation that seems to happen overnight, but in reality, it's much more of a process than that. And it also includes the transfer of labor, knowledge, relationships, skills, management, decision-making on the farm. So interesting statistic here coming out of the census in 2016 was that 92% of Canadian farms do not have a formal succession plan, which is quite an alarming number when you think about it. And we know that there's some new data coming out now that says that a little over 10% of farms do now have a plan, which is great news. It means we're heading in the right direction. But the big question is, if so many of you are here today to learn about succession planning, we know that 90% of people still haven't gone down the process. So the big question is, if everybody knows we need to do this, why have more farms not got succession plans in place?
Well, we know this isn't easy. We know it's hard work. And if it was easy, a lot of people would have this done. And as Andy just said, the stats don't represent that. So for the last 23 years, I've been trying to figure out not only what does hold my family back from planning, but what holds other families back from planning. So some of the common barriers that we see and fear with a lot of our families that are facing the same things our financial concerns. What does one generation need to remove themselves and to exit from the business and from ownership? What does one generation need to come into ownership? A lot of us know that this is all we know. It's what we do. We don't have a lot of hobbies. So it becomes our identity. And it's really hard to let go. It's often hard to pass on control of that business that's been generational. The next thing is, again, on a lot of people's minds, but it's marital breakdown. We don't want to start these conversations at the kitchen table and show a lack of trust or faith in the next generation, but we've already bought the farm once and we don't want to buy it again. It's usually our biggest asset and we're very fearful to lose it. So we have to protect that. One thing that comes up a lot is obviously family conflict. There's families that don't want to start the conversation for fear of a blow up at the kitchen table. They want to keep having Sunday dinners together. So this is very emotional work, and it's obviously difficult for a lot of families to start that. So, and a lot of families ask us, they're not really sure where to start with this process.
So one of the things we also wanted to highlight today is, for those of you in the room that do have a plan in place, what are some of the reasons that a plan might fail or break down? Well, one of the most common things we see here is that 60% of farm succession breaks down because of a lack of communication or trust. And you'll notice throughout this presentation that communication is a key theme that comes up quite often. Because even if you have a plan in place, it's so important to make sure you communicate the key elements of that plan and have something as a point of reference so that if something happens to you or your farm, your plans don't go with you. A lot of people keep their plans in their head, and if something happens to them, there's no one else to pick up those pieces because there's no reference point. So having something as the basis of that communication can go a long way when it comes to farm succession. 25% is actually from a lack of unprepared heirs. And we see this quite often where sometimes the next generation simply isn't ready to take over that farm yet. There's various reasons for this, but some of the common ones are, a lot of the next generation has been a big part of the farm operations. And from a labor standpoint, they're more than ready to take over the farm. But from more of a business decision making, from a financial standpoint, there's a lot of the next generation of farmers that haven't been exposed to some of those more intricate pieces of farming. And when the farm is then passed to them, all of a sudden they're faced with new challenges that they've not been prepared for in the past. We see 12% falls apart due to a lack of aligned mission or vision. The most common source of this we see is when we have two generations that are working on the farm together, one of them entering, one of them exiting. The exiting generation of the farm very often has a much more conservative nature when it comes to farm decisions because they have more to protect and more to make sure that they receive from farming. The new generation is usually much more growth minded and is willing to take on a greater portion of risk. And when those two people are trying to run a business together, you can have some very conflicting ideologies around the farm. The final one here is 3% is because of a failure of professionals. This is usually not necessarily a technical area, but more of a case of the professional teams not pulling the rope in the same direction. We have our legal team, our accounting, our tax teams all working on individual pieces of our farm plan, but who's actually making sure they're pulling the rope in the same direction and solving the same problems on the farm? So what we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about a real world scenario for farm succession. And for those of you who have seen us present before, you may have noticed that this is a similar case than we've talked about in the past. And the reason we're doing that today is because the thing about farm succession is it's a constantly evolving process. And this particular family, we've come back to revisit the succession process because the tax rules have changed a little bit, like we'll talk about later. So when we originally did this plan a few years ago, some of the opportunities for this family that are present today didn't exist. So for us as planners, it's great to recircle back and make sure we can be as efficient as possible. And we thought this would be a great way to highlight some of those changes for you today. So to give you guys a little bit of an overview about this farm, we got a Southwest Ontario dairy farm. They're farming about 400 acres of land, which at the time was worth about $20,000 per acre. It's 120 kilos of quota, so about 2.8 million in value there. This is an incorporated farm, and we'll talk about this throughout, the slight differences between being incorporated versus not incorporated, but the similar options apply, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. There is a bit of debt still on the farm. It's cash flow positive. The farming children are taking a bit of a salary from the farm, and currently the ownership lies with 50% being in mom's hands and then 25% each for the farming children. And that was inherited from dad's estate, who passed away a few years ago. So what we'd like to do is we just talk a little bit about the process we follow when we're working with a family to try and figure out some of the roadblocks along the way. We've already talked about what some of those key roadblocks may be, but throughout the process, you'll see how we overcome them to achieve a solution for the family. So the first place that we always start when it comes to farm succession is with the family. And our best practice we found is we interview everybody involved in the succession process, whether farming or non-farming. And the reason we do that is simple. Everybody's going to have a unique perspective when it comes to what should happen to the future of the farm. And it's so important to consider their perspectives in your planning, because if we don't, that's where we find a gap or a lack of aligned vision in the family. Most people in the room that we talk to have a goal of maintaining family harmony in this process. And unless we consider the perspective of everybody involved, it is really hard to maintain that family harmony throughout. That's the reason we do the interviews with everybody involved. But it's important to remember that just because people have a voice in this process doesn't mean they necessarily get a vote in the final outcome. Something interesting that we have started to, especially over the past couple of years, is what's called a predictive index. And a predictive index is essentially a type of personality or behavior testing that we can use with the families we work with. And some people get a little bit alarmed by the word testing, but it's really more of an analysis or an overview of how people react and how they behave in certain situations. The reason that's so important for us is when we're planning the future of these family farms, we have partnerships working together. How are these people going to work together moving forward if they have very contrasting personality types? You can have some people that are naturally more dominant than others. And if you have a dominant versus a submissive business partner, one of them's more inclined to get their way in the future. So especially in farms these days, we see a lot of sibling partnerships. And it's important to make sure that when we're looking at succession, we want to make sure we have the right agreements in place to help govern these relationships moving forward. What it also lets us do is identify the right roles and responsibilities for each family member. If we have some people that are more inclined to be geared towards empathy and working with animals, and we have others that are more inclined to be a little bit more self-sufficient and spend more time alone, then maybe they're more geared towards field work. So there's lots of different things to take away from these predictive indexing, and for us it really helps align the roles and responsibilities when we're looking at the farm in the future. So during this process, really what we're looking to do is align the goals of the family and identify the gaps. If we can figure out the pieces that everybody's already on the same page on throughout the succession process, we know that some of those pieces will kind of fall into place. But if we notice there's some key gaps that are missing where people have different opinions or values, then that's where we need to spend our time to start to build a plan around addressing those issues. One of the most important pieces that we'd like everyone to take away from today is that for a family and a farm to really be successful when it comes to succession planning, you got to be ready, you got to be willing, you got to be able to make some of the changes necessary to implement the succession on your farm. I talked a little bit about the predictive index already, but this is a little more of a visual of what's involved in it and how it goes through. But like we've already mentioned, it talks about the relationships, people's roles, how their leadership styles, come into play with farm succession, especially around when we look at how people fit together in the succession puzzle. Because like we know, everybody in the room probably knows succession is not just about one person. It's about a family unit and a family farm continuing for the future. And if everybody doesn't have some collaboration or some cohesion moving forward, then it can be difficult for that plan to be successful. So we do spend a little bit of time on this. In this particular scenario, like we mentioned, we spent a little bit of time talking with everybody involved. So the results of this succession, the discovery phase in this succession plan brought about the following kind of key goals for this family. On the left side of the screen here, we've got the mom. Mom's 74 years old. As we mentioned, she is widowed, but she still does own 50% of the farming operation. Her husband passed away a number of years ago now, and at that time didn't leave anything for his non-farming children as part of his estate. So we already know here we're dealing with a little bit of a discrepancy when it comes to farming versus non-farming children. The mom does have some personal investments, and she does have a little bit of corporate insurance in place that the children don't know about at this point. One of mom's key goals here is that she wants to be fair to all of her children. She does not want to burden the farm financially, and she also wants to ensure that family harmony continues, because right now everybody gets along. And one of mom's key goals here is to make sure that that continues moving forward. The farming child one here is really who most people would identify as the primary successor on this farm. 50 years old, does have 2 children, and already has 25% ownership in the farm. Some of the goals of this farming child were to be rewarded for 20 years of sweat equity in the business. We mentioned that they are currently receiving a salary, but that's only been in existence since Dad passed away. So there's quite a number of years of service that were never really compensated before prior to that. They're already looking for a path for the next generation. They haven't even got all the keys to the farm themselves yet, but they're already looking to find a way of bringing their kids into the business. Big priority for this member of the family was to ensure the farm remains financially viable. And also, it's always great to see when the children really want to make sure mom is cared for financially. Farming Child 2 is in a very similar scenario, except for one key difference is it doesn't have any children of their own. So when it comes to succession for this family member, it's about how to pass the farm to the nieces and nephews, or in this case, particularly the nephews. While doing that, also wants to treat his nieces fairly, continue to be involved in the family farm, but at the same time, scale back a little bit and pass on some of that responsibility to the next generation. Looking at the non-farming children and the third generation of farmers here, so the non-farming kids really have no involvement in the farm whatsoever. They have a great relationship with the family, but even their kids are not showing interest in coming into the farm in the future. The big piece here is that because these children were not included in Dad's estate when he passed, they still feel like they want to be treated somewhat fairly through Mom's estate. However, they do understand that based on the value of the land and the farming business, that equal will probably not be feasible. And this really brings us into that conversation of how to balance fair and equal when it comes to farming. And the final character here is the third generation farmers in the farm. They're ready to commit to this family farm. They're chomping at the bit and really looking for a pathway towards ownership. The big thing, and we hear it quite a lot in the work we do, that we don't want to wait 25 years for ownership like Dad did. And it's, sometimes it can come across as being a little bit entitled or a little bit needy, but in this case, it really is coming from a place of good intentions and really wanting to find a good path into the business to hit the ground running for success. And we mentioned earlier that there's often a contrast in values between each generation. And one of the big goals for these guys is that they really want to continue to expand the farm. It's more land, more quota, update the facilities. And if we contrast that to the kind of perspective of Mom and Farming Child 1 here, it's a little more conservative and looking to protect the legacy a little more. So we can already see here that we have a difference of goals and perspective for this family. So when we look at succession, it's how do we bring it all together to try and find a plan that finds some balance between everybody's goals.
That's when it usually comes down to money, which understanding or having a beat on the finances of the farm is really important. Quite often, the generation that's trying to exit or trying to come up with options for the next generation doesn't really have their hand on the pulse of the financials of the business or their own personal needs. As we all know, the water is quite often muddy, meaning that the personal expenses are paid for by the farm. So one of the first exercises we have to do with families is to unmuddy that water. What are those expenses that Mom has needed for lifestyle income from now to the end, to the finish line, as we call it? What can the farm afford to pay? And that will also help understand what can also be left over for growth initiatives. Is there, the next piece of equipment or the next farm available to buy? Because as we said, this comes sometimes a bit of a contrast when it comes to one generation trying to harvest and another generation trying to grow. So we got to have or do our due diligence and have a good beat on the assets and valuations of the farm. So the first exercise we really do is we try to, again, take an understanding of what do we have here. So we value, again, a brief value on the land, the machinery, the livestock, and the quota. And I know these numbers are hard to see, but if anything, just take away that we're just quantifying farm assets, farm debt, and ultimately in the far right of this screen, we're looking at what does one generation need for lifestyle funding and what's left over. That sometimes is what we call that difference in value that could either be sold to the next generation or potentially gifted. So now that we know what we have to work with, we have to understand what does Mom, in this case, need to redeem from the farm to be comfortable. And again, that's a little bit of a want and need conversation with Mom. She did have some obviously government pensions from Canada Pension, OAS. She was at the time taking a minimum amount from her RIF, which can be a bit of a trap when you think about when you pass away, your RSPs are deemed disposed of the day you die. If you have a spouse, they can roll over. As we know, her spouse passed away a few years ago. So when I seen that she was taking a minimum, I said, you know what, there is a better way to do this. Let's try to exhaust your RSP investments by age 90 so that there isn't another beneficiary, potentially Revenue Canada. She was also taking salaries up from the farm. which again, not our place to say that you need it or don't need it, but there was a more efficient way to extract the value, which we're going to show you in a few minutes. But she was taking salary, and of course with salary comes deductions for EI, CPP, payroll tax, etc. So it just becomes an inefficient way. And quite often we say there's just too many hands touch your money. As we all know, it's not about what we make anymore, it's about what we keep. So tax becomes a very important tool, and also an important part of, or an effect or impact on our take-home taxable income. So the one thing to notice here is basically all I'm trying to get a beat on is, what does mom need? So she unmuddied the water. She says, you know what, it's $5,000 a month. We look at her sources, and then we basically take her all the way across to age 90. And then we find out in the bottom left there, what is that cumulative surplus or deficit? In this case, she was basically need about $291,000 from the farm over the course of her lifetime. So now that we know what she needs, it actually allows people to make better informed decisions. You think about it, when you first start this process, there's so many different ideas. Everybody has an idea of how they got the farm or what it worked for my neighbor, but every family is so unique and every farm is so unique that these options have to be custom made or co-created with the family based on their unique circumstances. So now that we know what mom needs to redeem, or again, let go is the best word, let go of ownership and control. Not that she was actually exercising control, but that is a word that comes up quite often in our work. So there's basically 3 different ways that you can do this. Again, whether you're incorporated or you just have personal farms, these 3 methods will apply to each situation. So if you can think about the spectrum, you can either sell it, realize the gain on the sale, you could give it away and build a plan of hope. And the third option is finding somewhere in the middle, which is what we call the hybrid approach. And we utilize our current tax rules and exemptions and try to, again, extract only what we need from the farm and leave enough on the vine, so to speak, for the next generation to maintain a sustainable farm operation. So as we walk through each of these, we almost call it the transition spectrum. And again, it's applicable whether you're incorporated or you're just dealing with a one family farm personally owned. As you see on the far left, a gift of 100%. So if I could just give it to you, to my son or daughter, wouldn't that be great? But the problem with that, if I have other children, it creates a greater discrepancy in the estate values. It doesn't allow or create a responsibility for financial security for the exiting generation. It's actually building a plan of hope. I hope that if I run out of money, the next generation will take care of me. The other thing it does is it creates less financial responsibility for the entering generation. So we talked about the word entitlement. You know, we all, I think, got the farms to where they are today by taking on debt. You know, my feet would hit the floor every morning knowing that I had to, get out there and work to pay off debts and to be more skin in the game, all these things we want our kids in the next generation to have as well. And lastly, there's obviously an increase in financial stability for the farm when it's gifted, because there's not debts to pay or the responsibility to fund an exiting generation. So then if you think about the far right of this, well, sure, a fair market value sale, well, that's probably less doable. It's less financially feasible for the entering generation, especially with the land values today. A lot of people say, you know what, if I had to pay for fair market value, there's no way I could take over the family farm. It also it creates more retirement capital for the exiting generation. But as I said earlier, if you extract value you don't need from your assets, from your business today, you're probably creating one more hand in the middle, which is tax. And it's generally for Revenue Canada, and there's a better way to do it. It does create less estate discrepancy, because if you're not giving it away to the next generation, you're selling it. That's fair for all kids, and it's sometimes it's an easy way to have no estate discrepancy at all, but less efficient. And obviously, it's less incentive for succession. I don't think too many today can afford to do it and don't want to do it. And lastly, there's certainly less sweat equity accounted for. So what we do, I'll just walk through the advantages and disadvantages of each again. So the advantage of obviously realizing the gain is that you are creating a retirement fund for the exiting generation. You're also increasing the cost base for the next generation if they have to sell for any reason. As we all know, tax is attracted by that difference between what we paid for the farm and what it's worth today, which is what we call a capital gain. The other advantage of this option is quite often we've probably used our capital gains exemption. So a disadvantage would be that there's no cash flow impacted by new debt from the purchase, right? Because if the increase in the cost base is not beneficial if no one's ever going to sell it. But that's a lot of nevers there, right? But what if one day someone had to sell that farm? It really is nice to utilize the exemptions or the tax planning tools that we have at our hands today. As far as tax implications, Income tax, capital gains, and alternative minimum tax could be applicable to this situation because the gain is going to enter into your income in any 1 year, and AMT or alternative minimum tax is going to apply. As we all know, it is refundable over possibly a 10-year period if your gain is stretched across as well. It also, though, could cause an OAS clawback to your old age pension, depending on the income level of the farm that entered into your gain. So again, on the opposite side of realizing the gain would be giving it away. The advantage of that is it's definitely financially feasible for that entering generation because there's no responsibility or cash flow burden. There's no income tax triggered. So this is simple. And there's also no income impact on my income tested benefits like OAS or GIS. But the disadvantage of this is that we haven't maximized the cost base. We haven't actually used our planning tools we have at our hands today, the use of our capital gains exemption. There'd be no additional retirement funding. And it could create a discrepancy in the state if a gift is substantial. So it's creating a wider difference or discrepancy in the estate values. And then lastly, that third option, which we call again the hybrid approach, or really trying to find that sweet spot. It does require a lot of work and time, but this is the best for both generations because what we're ultimately doing is trying to understand what one generation needs to live. In this case, it's mom. What does she want for her lifestyle? What can the farm afford to pay her? And then what we do is we show her the most efficient way to extract that value and keep more in her pocket and less going back to Revenue Canada, which is minimizing tax.
Yeah, so as we were working with this family, it became pretty apparent after realizing what the goals of everybody involved were that there was going to be some pretty significant tax implications of this. As a lot of people may know, you can actually gift farm properties, qualifying farm properties, up and down a family tree. So parents, grandparents, children, straight up and down that tree without incurring tax on the transfer. However, you can't go diagonally on the family tree when you look to gift those assets. So as you guys recall from earlier in this, we know that Farming Child 2 had the intentions of passing his farm, whether it was a gift or a sale, onto his nephews in this scenario. Well, unfortunately, that's going to trigger tax. And we know that right now, Farming Child 2 only owns 25% of this farm. If mom was to pass her remaining shares of the farm onto Farming Child 2, who already has a significant tax bill to pay, all that's going to happen is that tax bill is going to get bigger as more shares fall into the hands of somebody that has an inefficient path for succession moving forward. So the question then becomes that we know we have this significant tax bill that's going to get bigger. How do we then move mom's shares of the farm down without creating a larger tax bill? So after having those discussions with the family, we start to realize a little bit about what the flow of shares should look like. We know that Farming Child 1 is ready to continue farming, and we also know that Farming Child 1's children are ready to get into this business. So if we align the flow of those shares with the long-term vision of the farm, we all of a sudden start having this pathway made from mom to Farming Child 1 to the eventual Generation 3 or grandchildren in this scenario. And essentially, we're left with the options here where mom can either gift or sell her shares to her first farming child, who can then in the future choose to then gift or sell his shares to his own kids. And both of those transactions can be done without incurring any tax, which in this scenario is a significant saving for this family that was previously missed when people were looking at the long-term impacts of succession. One of the things here is that Farming Child 2 can actually be compensated for the value of those shares by Farming Child 1. They can establish a promissory note, or essentially a promise to pay for the value of those shares that they can choose to redeem over any time period that they choose between them.
Yeah, so essentially what we're trying to do too is find the most efficient way to extract value. And as you know, there is a difference between corporate tax and personal tax. So if you think about what our current planning tools we have at our fingertips today, we have this thing called the lifetime capital gains exemption. For those of you that are incorporated, it's 971,000 approximately of qualifying shares of your farm corporation. And for those of you that aren't incorporated, it's $1 million personally, meaning assets that are worth $1 million can be passed on tax-free. So what we've done here is we're just showing this family. We've actually used this recently with the same family that we did this plan with back 6 or 7 years ago. But what we've done is we said, in order for the next generation to get in, how can we afford to? As we all know that there's only so much money or funds to go around. There's a lot of stakeholders involved when you think about the three generations. So we're trying to say, what's the most efficient way to extract value for the exiting generation? Well, I gotta say, but it's the less hands that touch your money, the better. So without getting into what Bill C-208 is, it was actually just an opportunity that was created to a planning bill that was created, sorry, in the Income Tax Act. It opened up an opportunity to use corporate funds to redeem corporate shares. So if before this was opened up or the advantage was created, it was basically your son or daughter would have to use after-tax personal dollars to fund that redemption. But now what we can do is we can actually use OPCO, or the farming companies, after-tax corporate dollars. And again, corporate tax is taxed at 12%. Personal tax, depending on your personal marginal tax rates, anywhere from possibly 30 to 50%. So again, the least impacted tax dollars are used in this scenario. So what we did, we basically essentially just had the farming sons establish a holding company, and there's a promise to pay, as Andy had put it, a promissory note put in place for the value of mom and dad's exemptions. And in this case, it's really, again, each individual. Mom's case, she only had $1 million exemption. We actually used this in the next generation. So mom and dad each had their exemption of $1 million. So the third generation could come in using operating company profits that would pay back the note. And I'll walk you through step by step on how we did that. So the first thing we do is we freeze the corp. Like anytime we do a reorganization, it's a real effective way, especially when there's an incorporated farm, to draw a line in the sand and for one generation to take back the fixed value preferred shares. And then the new common shares, or the future growth of the company, can go to the next generation. It also, we allowed those children to establish a holding company. And again, that holding company is going to basically be establishing a note payable between their parents. And again, that's a promise to pay, to allocate those dividends back to the holding company to pay off that note over time. And if you think about that income plan that we showed earlier, there's a lot of different ways you could redeem that note. And what we did here, if you remember the example, mom needed 50 grand. So to make it really simple, that $1 million of exemption could go across 20 years. Mom could redeem 50,000 tax-free dollars per year over 20 years payable, or sorry, 20-year term, to get her $1 million exemption used up, never have to pay any tax. And it's a very efficient way to extract that value over, again, salary and all the deductions on salary. So what we've done is we've used capital gains exemption, pulled tax-free funds to help mom fund her retirement or her income needs. Now the last point there is, you know what, this is the option of mom. So if mom didn't have some insurance in place, she could possibly use this note and tell her sons, you know what, boys, you're going to help create something for the non-farming girls. But in this case, mom decided she was going to forgive the note at the end because obviously she's getting what she needs and there's already something in place for the other non-farming kids. So just to, I guess, revisit this, the advantages of this option is any corporate growth would be attributable to the next generation. And it creates an opportunity to help fund mom's retirement through the tax-free sale of fixed value shares. Those share sales will create a note payable that can be left to the next generation through the will, as I said, or forgiven. And it provides a flexible tax-free retirement funding up to $1 million per farm owner, whether that's 50 grand a year for 20 years or 100 grand for 10. There's a few different ways you could set it up. And then the disadvantage to that is that the farm does have to have the cash to be able to fund this. The share sales could quite possibly impact OAS in any year of the share sale, which it did in this case. And obviously this thing called alternative minimum tax is entered into your income. It is a refundable tax and it can be, again, refunded over a 10-year period.
Yeah, so just to recap a little bit about where we're at with this family. So in the first phase, or that family discovery phase, we identified the goals and objectives of all the stakeholders, right? From there, we identified the income needs for the exiting generation, as well as looked at some of the cash flow viability of the farm. And that all happens in the second phase, which is that financial phase of the planning process. Daryl just mentioned quite a few of the transition options, which is very much phase 3. And for us in this scenario, we found a more efficient way of moving the shares between generations, while at the same time helping to fund those retirement buckets. So that's a little bit about where we're at with this case so far. But the next pieces that we haven't touched on yet are the governance and agreements around how to actually implement a plan like this. And the other phase that I'm sure everybody here is very curious about is how do you equalize the non-farming children in this scenario? So this is where phase 4 comes into effect, which is very much about estates and agreements. Now, we've got a few different pieces here that we always touch on throughout this process. We do like to make sure we address the risk management and insurance options for the family. A big portion of the discovery phase actually also ends up being about fair versus equal. And I know a lot of you that are on the call today will have a different idea or a different value of what fairness means to you. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Another piece here that comes up often is the legacy of the farm. What do you actually want your farming legacy to be about? And then the last bullet point there is governance and agreements. So once we have this plan, what agreements need to be in place to make sure that everything flows as we intend to, and to make sure that the relationships on the farm can continue to work harmoniously in the future. We also put a little point there about communication. The most important thing about succession plan is communicating the plan and communicating throughout the planning process so that everybody involved knows where things are at and what is to unfold moving forward. So talking about the equalization for the non-farming kids here, the questions become, how do we want to treat them? Do we want to treat them at what we view as fairly, or do we want to treat them equally? What kind of legacy do we want to leave? And another one is, when do we equalize? If we transition some farming assets to farming children today, does that mean we have to look at equalizing today? Or is it something we can look at further down the line through the estate perhaps? So one of the big questions here is, no matter what approach to equalization we take, there's usually some kind of capital requirement or financial component to it. And the question becomes, how do we fund equalization? So what I'd like to show you today is, this is a scenario a little bit more removed from our case study, but it's essentially 4 different ways of coming up with $1 million for equalization funding. And we'll talk through them all together here. The first one I wanted to look at is the borrow or finance approach. So say you wanted to come up with $1 million through a financing approach. Realistic expectations for an interest rate is going to be around 5%. The borrowing term is likely going to be 20 years or so. And when you project that out and you do the math on exactly what that's going to cost you to get the $1 million, it's going to cost you about $1.58 million to come up with a net of $1 million for the equalization. You know, there's pros and cons to that, but a lot of the questions are, what if the rates change? Is there any collateral obligations to that? And another piece here that's important to look at is the timing of it. This can be something that is probably going to be reactionary in nature, and it's hard to plan for this ahead of time. The second one we want to look at is selling an asset. And I know we've just done 2 weeks of in-person workshops, and usually you hear some boos when we mention selling the farmland. But the issue a lot of people run into if they were to sell the farmland is, a lot of us paid a lot less than our farms are worth today for those farms. So say we purchased a farm for $100,000 20 or 30 years ago. The sale price on that farm would have to be $1.5 million today. We'd pay about $469,000 of tax, and then we'd be left with $1 million in our pocket to help fund the equalization. The biggest issue there is that a lot of us don't want to leave less land to the next generation than we have today. It kind of goes against the purpose of succession planning a little bit to go down that road. So the first 2 options we've talked about there aren't the most efficient ways of creating this equalization fund. The next one is saving for it. So we're going to make a couple of assumptions here as well, but assume we could get a growth rate of 4% per year, and we started from zero. We'd have to save about $3,000 every month for 20 years and able to save $1 million. But if it all unfolds and we can get through all 20 years and save $3,000 every month, we have actually come up with $1 million by saving just $600,000 of our out-of-pocket dollars, which is starting to get a little bit more efficient. But the big red flag here is, what if we don't make it through 20 years? If we pass away or something happens to us that means we can no longer continue saving like this, only a couple years into the plan, all of a sudden we're left with a significant shortfall in our equalization bucket. So despite the fact it's more efficient, there's a lot of risk that comes with this option for funding. The fourth piece here is insurance. So if we wanted to look at this scenario, this $1 million policy is based on 2 healthy 65-year-olds and using what's called a joint last to die policy. I would like to make a note as well. This would be an example of a permanent policy where we know what the rates are going to be moving forward, and it isn't going to change over time. So for that $1 million death benefit, we will be looking at about $20,000 a year in an insurance premium, which, when you first map it out, sounds like a lot of money, especially when we consider using that as investing in insurance. But when you compare it to the saving approach, it's still only $1,650 a month, as opposed to saving $3,000 a month in the saving fund here. So it is still, from a cash flow perspective, easier to handle than the saving approach, But the big benefit here is that if something happened to you in that first year of having the policy, there's still the full million there for the payout. So a lot less risk associated with it when it comes to the long-term implications of building that equalization fund for your kids. And there's a few other advantages. It's a tax-free payout. So it's, if you insure it for the $1 million value, then you can be paid out the full $1 million value. So there is a lot of benefits that come with something like that. A lot of people don't spend the time to learn a little bit about insurance because some of us, or most of us, probably have the experience of never actually having insurance pay out for things like our snowmobile insurance or our car insurance. So we very much treat insurance like it's an expense. But when you start to look at insurance as a tool or an investment to achieving a certain goal, it can definitely play a role in farm succession. And it is important to take a look at that moving forward. So 4 different options have come up with $1 million. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. It just comes down to where your risk tolerances lie and where your personal preference would be for achieving that goal.
So once we got everyone's head nodding in the right direction, and as Andy had said earlier, we do a lot of work at the beginning so that when we get here, we feel pretty confident as well. And then this is maintaining confidence. How do we as a family want to govern ourselves? What are some of the things that we as facilitators and family coaches or advisors see as a potential contentious issue for the future? And obviously it's hard to see ahead 3, 5, 10, 20 years. And we always joke that if we do a really good job here, these agreements should gather dust. But we do want to open up the conversation. And again, very unique to every family about what these agreements need to have as content. Sometimes it's a life lease. And in this example, this case study, it was a life lease for mom. Mom wanted to make sure that she could always live in that home as long as she possibly can. Like a lot of us, we don't want to be forced out. We don't want to have to go to retirement care or nursing or living because of the costs today and that moving target of those costs. When you think about usage agreements of driveways, we have non-farming kids sometimes in homes on farms that are being used again for cash crops or again for farming. We want to make sure we can get to the land when we need to. We don't want to have a contentious moment with a son-in-law or daughter-in-law. So we want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And I think the biggest part of agreements, like I quite often say, is for one generation, what's important to govern ourselves getting in. For the exiting generation, what do they see or need for confidence to be able to back away, hand over control, and again, depend on a monthly income. They got to have peace of mind. So that's what agreements do. They give peace of mind. They manage those potential surprises for down the road. But the number one thing I can say is that families need to co-create these with professionals like Andrew and I. And then we get lawyers to help implement them and make that part of this plan. And they go into the family's planning binder. And yes, quite often we may have to revisit or revise them as we move forward, but they're a great living document to hopefully maintain and manage and minimize surprises. So lastly, as we talk about what do we do with this family, and again, I always say in a perfect world, in a perfect world, every farm family would have 2 estates, a farming estate and a non-farming estate. I always say the farming assets, again, ideally would go to a farming successor. Our non-farming assets would go to a non-farming successor or child, I should say, because that would be clean and simple. So that's really what we do. We try to, again, take inventory or take and build clarity and quantify as we move forward with families. What do we have in each of those 2 buckets? Because as you know, I'm going to touch on it in a minute, but we did establish a life insurance policy to equalize the non-farming kids. There was one already done by mom and dad previously in this case study that's going to pay out to that generation of non-farming. And again, we had to have that discussion as we move forward with the next generation. We wanted a big miss here for the family, and a big reason why they actually reached out to us originally, because the boys had seen us present at another event, and they knew that mom didn't have dual wills. And I don't know if we touched on it earlier, but probate on those shares of a $10 million farm would attract at least $150,000 of probate fees. So an easy solution, an easy fix, a great way to find a little win for the family there. But we had to create dual wills. Again, the less hands touching your money, folks, the better. So make sure you have those in place. And lastly, no matter what those recommendations or the plan is, the best part we always say is that bringing the family together to communicate the plan so everyone knows what the expectations, intentions of every stakeholder are, so that again, that we can have family harmony and a family that's aligned with a vision moving forward is usually what we look for as we finish up with families.
So just to check back in on some of the goals that we talked about, one of the first goals was we don't have any off-farm savings or investment to help fund retirement for Generation 2. Well, retirement was created by utilizing some of the cash flow from the Bill C-208 planning, and we used a pretty efficient way of filling those buckets. Another problem that we encountered was the farm has lots of value, so how do we create fairness for the non-farming children? Well, in this scenario, we used the corporately funded insurance policies to provide the most efficient way of filling the bucket for the non-farming kids. Big concern of the family was what are the tax implications of succession? Well, when we went through and we changed the flow of those shares, we used Bill C-208 to help address those tax implications. And by moving those shares, we help to avoid a future growth in those tax obligations as well. So kind of a double win on that side of things. How do we protect the family harmony? This one was pretty simple in this case. Open communication, communicating the plan to the next generation and the non-farming kids kind of left everybody in a place where they have no surprises and knows the plan moving forward. And then one of the final key problems we had in this scenario was what does that roadmap look like for Generation 3's entry into the farm? Well, if you remember, we did a corporate freeze, and essentially what we do there is we draw a line in the sand and give that new generation a starting point. Anything accumulated prior to that date can stay with the current owners, the generation that's already in the business, and then those future generations can have the growth in the farm moving forward. So it really helps to incentivize them to keep growing, keep the farm moving forward, and not just, we use the word entitlement a few times, not just kind of get lazy in the future, for lack of a better term.
Just want to revisit the process because again, I know that this is what makes our firm unique, and we hear this every day from a lot of other professionals as well. Because again, professionals think technically, and we do as well. But we got to remember it's really important to get the why figured out before the how. So that first two pieces, if you will, the first two phases, as Andy said, family is the foundation of the work we do. We got to make sure that we can align a family vision. Or why are we doing this? And why would we want to build something based on assumptions? I've had so many families over the years say, no, I know exactly what my kids want. And then when we do our discovery work, we just about fall off the chair. It doesn't align at all with what the parents thought. So let's do this once, let's do it right. And let's find out what everyone feels or their vision of success is for the future. And does the farm fit in? That financial aspect, again, knowing our numbers today is so impactful. This so many hands touching our money when it comes to taxation, tax liabilities at the end. So we really want to have a really good beat on what is the farm worth? What does one generation again need to extract from it to be comfortable? And then how can we best do it so we can be most efficient and leave again there a little more meat on the bone for the next generation to be sustainable with the farm operation. Then we get into transition. And if we've done our job well and we've really taken the time to understand the family, understand their values and their vision, and now I understand financially what they need from it. When we get to transition, we don't have 20 options to put in front of people. We usually only have a couple because we know them so well, and watching their heads go up and down like, wow, this is us and this is what we need. This is what success is to us. And I think this is what makes us different, because when we get to transition, we can actually have customized options that families can actually agree on and move forward with their farm plans. And then lastly, as we just said, we want to finish well. We want to finish in style. So now that we've got everybody's heads and everybody's agreeing, let's get the agreements in place. Let's get the wills updated, and let's get everything aligning to the plan that we've created so that the future of the family and the farm is in good hands. So many ask us, how do you overcome these challenges? How do we get started? Well, the first step really is to start the conversation. As many of you know, this is not easy work. And it's tough conversations, and families are fearful for many reasons. So then ask a professional. Ask Andrew and I. Again, we'll talk about how you can get in touch with us, but let us help you start that conversation. We have tough conversations with families every day. We can have them because we're not the parents. We're not the bankers, lawyers, or accountants. We're insulated from the family. We're quite often safe. And that's why people love having us at the table to help start these conversations. We want to make sure, again, that vision for the future is aligned. We want to make sure that we're sharing the stories from the last generation. How did our dad or grandfather get this farm? Because that does create an inclusive environment when we're sharing. And again, it couldn't have been easy either. Everything is relevant. I know the prices might have been a little bit different, but I'm sure it wasn't easy. So then we involve that next generation early and provide the right coaching and training so that we can get them in the right place, understanding the gaps or the milestones needed to get them to that place where we're all confident to move forward. And lastly, I think this is a very specialized world with specialized rules around taxation and the ability to use these planning tools at our fingertips today make sure you're dealing with people that don't just dabble in this as a part-time gig. We want to make sure that we're dealing with professionals that do this every day, day in and day out, of the team of specialists. Thank you.
So a lot of people, we talk about building that professional team and having the experts to come in and help you with your farm succession journey. Well, one of the ways we help do that at Farm Life, we mentioned earlier in the presentation that sometimes there's a misconnect when it comes to farm succession with having the professional teams pulling the rope in the same direction. Well, a big piece of the time and the effort that we put in here at Farm Life is to coordinate with the professional teams to make sure that everybody is pulling the rope in the right direction. We can help build and create the plans with the family, then we can take them to the professional teams to do the final pieces of implementation. So it really does keep everybody working towards the same goal, creates a more efficient process, and also make sure there's no gaps that are missed in the process. And I think it goes a long way in ensuring a viable plan is created. One of the reasons that we do, let's say we stick around after the plan is made, and this family is a prime example of that. We came back to work on some business strategy with this family, and that's where we started to identify that some of these new tax rules would play a great role for this family. So the fact that we stayed around and we were used for some business strategy and some family meetings after the succession plan had been created opened the door for actually making the plan that we created even more efficient down the line. So one of the other things we come back for quite a bit is the next generation training and development. Sometimes when the successors or the next generation are not quite ready and they need a little bit of financial training or financial literacy, and just to help make better decisions on that family farm, we can help provide that support and make sure that the generation that's looking to take over the farm really is prepared to do so. And obviously financial planning is a big piece of what we do. And for us, the clients that we work with throughout the succession process often has a comeback to help with their financial planning moving forward. So as things change or as things develop on the farm or with the plan, we can make sure that everyone's financial plan is adjusted accordingly so that they don't have to lose sleep at night in the future. So that concludes our presentation on succession. We are going to be opening the floor up to some questions here. If anyone is looking for our contact information, it's up here on the screen. You can see our cell, our email, and our website for more information. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. I don't know if Daryl, you have any closing remarks at all here?
No, it's been great, Andrew. And I think as many of you may know, we are a member benefit partner with the OFA, so we're more than happy. A lot of people have personal questions. I know that if you have a general question, we're happy to take it in the Q&A portion of this today. If you have a personal question, you want to reach out to Andrew or I directly, because it may require a little bit more information to actually give you a good recommendation or to understand how we can help with your outcomes. Don't be afraid to write to either one of us. As you know, as an OFA member, you do get a consultation, again, either over the phone or in person if we can help, and we're happy to take those calls to understand your situation better. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Daryl. We appreciate that. And just to remind everyone that if you have questions, I see they're starting to come in the chat function on your screen. We have Daryl and Andrew there to try to respond to your questions. So I think the first question I see there, Daryl and Andrew, is can you explain dual wills, please?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to take the lead on that one, Daryl.
Sure, absolutely. It's a common question. It's a good one. It's for anyone that's got a farm corporation, we recommend that you have a separate, sometimes called a secondary, a dual will, or a corporate will. All have the same meaning, just different wording. But what it does is dealing specifically with the shares of the farm corp. If you didn't have that dual will, what would happen is if you passed away, those shares would go through probate. And as we know, probate in Ontario and Canada is 1.5% of the value. So in our case study that we talked about, where mother didn't have a secondary or corporate will in place, that would have attracted 1.5% of the $10 million in value of shares, which would have been $150,000 of probate fees. So an easy way to avoid that is to ask your lawyer or legal representative to put a dual will in place to avoid probate and keep things simple and clean.
Yeah, hopefully that clarifies things a little bit for you. And we have had a number of questions come through just privately to us, Tom. So we're going to go through a couple of those, and then we'll go through some of the group chat ones there. But First question we got in was, when should we start to give up our farm ownership?
Yeah, I think it really depends on your own unique situation. As we say, that every family is unique and every farm is unique with its own certain circumstances. It depends on, I think, the readiness that Andy talks about quite often with the next generation. Are they comfortable, confident, and ready to take over? Is all the right things in place to make you comfortable and, again, confident enough to let go? For most of us, most of our clients as well, the farm becomes our biggest asset, and it's not always the easiest thing to let go of. So we create milestones too, and where are sometimes the gaps in the next generation, or possibly in the exiting generation? What do we need to have that comfort or that confidence to let go? And as we said in this presentation today, and it's pretty consistent with our process, we really try to understand financially what that generation needs to let go. What do they need financially to be secure? There's a lot of moving targets today when we think about inflation. And obviously on the other side of it, the investment returns that we could or couldn't get. So we want to do, again, like I said earlier, just the right job once and clarify these things so that everyone's in a good place. And like I said, I think it really comes down to your own unique circumstances about what you need from it. Is the farm viable and sustainable enough to provide that income? And like we say, quite often we'll wrap up the values so we protect the exiting generation and establish a chance for the incoming generation, instead of having to take on more debt. Possibly mom and dad are basically becoming the bank. So I hope that helps. And again, if we don't get to your questions, I know there's a lot rolling in here too. We're going to try our best, but we're always happy to try to, if they're very detailed, especially about your own situation, we can always touch base by email and try to give you a little bit more clarity too.
We got a question in the chat here. Do you ever work with couples who have no following generations interested? We work with a little bit of everything. It's and a lot of the same scenarios apply, whether you have successors or you don't have successors directly related to you. You can still explore the same options, either with people outside the family or looking at a more efficient exit strategy, right? It's not all of the family rollover rules will apply to you if you have a successor that's not a relative, for example. And if you're looking to a scenario where there is no successor at all, it's still about exiting the farm cleanly and understanding some of the tax obligations you may have on the way. So we definitely do work with that. We come across that every now and again where there is no successor, but it's still a lot of the same scenarios will apply. We want to make sure we have an efficient solution to that exit strategy. I hope that answers your question there.
I see one here from Nancy, Andrew, and it's she's just asking, because she did put her name in there and she put it out to everyone. So Nancy, you're asking, the dairy was the example of the farm, obviously, that we use in this case study. Have you ever worked with any hog or cash crop operations? We are incorporated, but we're looking at 2 of our kids taking over, each having their own separate ownership and not joint. Well, I would say that that's probably a good way to move forward. As we all know, it's difficult to, as we quite often say, we don't get to choose our family, and it's nice if you can choose your business partners. So I love the idea of having both your kids have separate farm corps to take over the hog and cash crop operation. And yes, we do have actually a lot of hog operations that we worked with, especially in the last few years. And we actually have a scenario very similar to this one up in Western Ontario, where we've got multiple successors, multiple corps, and it's all the same things we went through today. It's really just understanding, again, does the vision align? Are we financially, what do we need from it? And again, looking at those transition options, as I said, it's really trying to understand where and how you can utilize those the tax planning rules we have at our hands today, again, to just make this more efficient. The less that we have to take out and pay tax on, the better for both the farm and the family moving forward. And I hope that helps.
Another one that came in to us privately here is, should we be trying to leave our farms with as little debt as possible? Well, that's very much a question that's going to be unique to each farm scenario, but the biggest aspect to look at there is trying not to leave our farms with too much debt. Having a little bit of debt associated with the farm on the transfer can actually be a good thing, because it can give the next generation that little bit of accountability that they need to make the right financial decisions. A lot of the successors that we have on our farms haven't had to go through handling a debt load before, or refinancing mortgages, for example. So having a little bit of accountability or a little bit of obligation on that farm can help our successors, achieve readiness a little bit faster and keep those accountability pieces up. So when we look at how much debt to leave in our farms, it really becomes a question that's unique to each farm's cash flow and the values of that particular family when it comes to risk tolerance. So it's a little bit of a personal situation on that one. Do we need to read that one a little bit? If you sell your farm, how long do you have to buy a qualifying farm property to avoid capital gains tax? Okay,
As long as it's done in the same year replacement value. So you have the current tax year if you do sell and receive a capital gain to offset it with any repurchase.
If a farm has been in the family for 125 years, would the value of the farm be for capital gain issue? Well, it honestly depends on how it's been transferred between the generations a little bit there, Roland, because when we do transfers between generations, we do have the opportunity to bump up that cost base. So it would all depend on whether the cost base has been bumped up over the years or not. If it's still at its original value, then for a capital gains perspective, you're going to be looking at what the original purchase price was and what it's worth today. So without understanding whether there's been any bumps along the way to increase that, what's called the ACB, the adjusted cost base of the farm, it's tough to know for sure what it would actually be like. We've got lots of questions rolling in here, so we're going to try and keep going through. As Darryl mentioned, if we don't manage to get to them all, feel free to reach out by email, especially if it's a very precise or intricate question that might need quite a few minutes to go through. We're going to try and get through as many of them as we can here. Would you go on there?
Yeah, there's one here from Barry that again out to everyone. Just asking, the question is regarding savings versus life insurance to fund your transition. In your presentation, your direction seems to be black and white on life insurance. What are the thoughts on a hybrid approach of both savings and life insurance? The savings, although meant for the transition, can be used as an emergency source of cash. Well, it's a great question, Barry. I think a couple things. We are not, just to be clear too, we're not saying that life insurance is a part of the transition. And actually for us, it's a solution to the family fairness or harmony part. Quite often, as a lot of people over the last few weeks in their workshops said, the hardest part of this is actually understanding how to become fair with our non-farming children. So obviously one of the biggest reasons with the life insurance is a great tool is because as that money gets saved over time, it does one of two things. It's tax sheltered from, obviously the growth is tax sheltered. If we did that on the outside in the savings vehicle, any growth is obviously open to taxation, again, in the form of dividends, capital gains, or interest, just like you would if you saved your money again in an investment account. So the beauty of the type of insurance that we often see our associates recommend for our clients is really the cash value life insurance. And the reason we like it too is it's the what if in 3 years or 5 years the farm does need capital. The family could actually agree to leverage or use that capital in 3 or 4 different ways. You can actually have a line of credit established, especially if it's in a farm corp. It becomes a real tax efficient vehicle because you can use that cash and actually loan it back to the farm or the business and write off the interest. And so that's when we look at these options, we're always looking at what's the biggest, again, most efficient vehicle, less hands touching that investment vehicle, the better. So that's why insurance does look so much better in a lot of these case studies, is because again, it's growing tax sheltered. It's there if the family needs it. And a lot of families do. We look at it saying there's also a way that you can use this while you're alive, and whatever you haven't used can pass on tax-free at the end. So I hope that helps to answer your question. I'm happy, again, like Andrew said, if there's any more specific information you need, reach at any time.
Yeah, we had another one here come through. What should we do if a family member won't come to the table to talk?
Yeah,
I know we run into a lot.
We do. It's it's, as we all know, it's an emotional process when we start involving everyone and getting their thoughts, their perspectives, and their voices, as Andrew puts it. And sometimes people do not want to come back to the table for different reasons. And maybe one of the reasons I've heard before is there's no sense me coming back to the table. Mom and dad already know my perspective and nothing's changed before. And I've had next gens, non-farming kids say they don't want to participate. What my answer to that quite often is that if you want to participate in the outcomes and be part of the outcome of this process, you need to be involved or participate in the process itself. And quite often that gets their attention. We usually get a chance to, again, understand their perspective. And then we encourage them and we help them understand that if you can't be courageous enough to share your thoughts or feelings, that's what we're here for as well. We often, we get permission from that next gen, and then we'll speak the voice for them, or we'll encourage or, again, empower them to share their thoughts and perspective with their family. And that's, again, it's not an easy thing, but a lot of times we manage those emotions as we go through the process.
I see we've had a follow-up to actually the first question we answered around dual will. So maybe I'll just touch on that again, just to clarify a little bit. But Juliet, essentially a dual will is having a second will in place that covers your corporate assets. When we talk about dual wills, it's about having a personal will and a corporate will to make sure that our corporate assets flow through the corporate will and our personal assets flow through our personal will. And the reason you would take something like that is to reduce the probate payable at the end of the day. So we did touch on that a little bit already. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit for you on that.
Thanks, Andrew. And I got one here from Rob. He's put it out to everyone as well. He's asking what different things have to be considered with a sole proprietorship as opposed to the transfer of Farm Corp. As I've tried to kind of explain to you over the last few weeks in our workshops, it's hard to get a case study that works for everyone. I think last year we used a simple one with a sole proprietorship, and this year everybody wanted a Farm Corp. But to be clear, Rob, the actual options are really the same. You know, again, you can do everything from a gift or a rollover all the way up to a fair market value sale to the next generation. But again, where we find most people land is somewhere in the middle. And the only real any difference is there's a little bit more. There's a personal exemption of $1 million on your lifetime capital gains exemption. So you actually have a little bit more than you would if you had shares of a qualifying Farm Corp, which is approximately $971,000 right now. I don't think there's any other real things that I would say are different. Again, the process of how you redeem that money in this example we used today was really just trying to use after-tax corporate cash flow. And obviously in a personal situation, there is no corp, so you'd just be using personal after-tax dollars to fund that. Again, very similar. You could have a promissory note to take back and hold on to as protection, peace of mind for those what ifs, and the next generation can basically buy or redeem that prom note over your lifetime. In the same situation as we said in the case study today, you have the option at the end, as Andrew said, to either forgive the balance of that note if you don't have any other solutions to come up with fairness, or if you don't have any other children, you may want to forgive it. If you do have other children and you couldn't possibly come up with either insurance or a funding mechanism, you could have the farming child obviously fund the balance of that note to your personal estate. So I hope that helps.
We have one coming here that's a bit of a follow-on to the kind of retirement income slide we talked about for the mom in this scenario. So how do we know how much value we need to take out of the farm?
Yeah, that's a great question. That sounds like our case study too is just income planning, right, Andrew? So as we said, it's really important to the first step for me is to unmuddy the water. And I know a lot of heads nodded over the last few weeks when we talked like that, because it's not about, obviously it's not the wrong way to do it, meaning how it gets accounted for, how it gets paid by the farm business, because I think most farm families, most business owners, we try to expense as much as we can through the business. And quite often the business, and in this case, the farm pays for everything, not only the farm expenses, but the personal expenses. So one of the first exercises that we go through with the exiting generation is to unmuddy the water or quantify and clarify what they need financially to get to what we call the finish line. And it is an exercise because if a lot of us struggle with it because again, the business is paid for, but all we're really trying to do is again, take account, take the time to quantify what is our heat, what is our hydro, what are all the expenses. Again, regardless of who's paying for them now, we need to know what your personal expenses or lifestyle needs are. And then we use this a calculator basically, and we build an income plan for families to show them here's all your sources of income: Canada pension, OAS, which is your old age pension, possibly off farm investments or pensions, and then basically what we're looking at is what is the gap. We also include inflation in there at 3%, which obviously is a moving target these days, but it gives people an idea of, if it's 30 years of retirement income we need, or lifestyle income, and it's $50,000 a year, yes, that's $1.5 million that we need to extract at some point, if that's the gap. And that number has to come from our biggest investment, which is quite often the farm. Again, I hope that helps.
We've got a question. What different things have to be considered with sole proprietorships as opposed to the transfer of a farm corporation? Well, to be honest, Rob, a lot of the same questions are going to have to be asked, and a lot of the same discussions are going to be needed. Just because something's incorporated versus unincorporated doesn't mean there's any less level of complexity or complication to it. It's just slightly different tax treatment at the end of the day. But the same questions, the same processes, and the same procedures are effectively going to be followed, whether you're incorporated or not incorporated. It just comes down to what the technical outcome might be at the end, but very similar process, whether incorporated or unincorporated. I hope that clarifies things a little bit.
Yep. Well, there's again lots rolling in. This is an interesting one, so I may as well pick it up from Alex. It's just asking, do you recommend daughter-in-laws, son-in-laws be included in the family meeting, or direct family members only? That is what I often say is I sometimes will just leave that up to mom and dad to decide. It's not really we don't set rules. It really depends on obviously how long they've been involved in the family. But I also think that it's up to the family to decide, meeting guidelines, meeting rules around who should be attending. Sometimes when we go to do our first meeting, everyone's there, and you know what? That's an open family with no secrets, and they want to share everything. Well, we just go with the flow. Obviously, our goal is to get individual perspectives. So often when Andrew and I are doing our individual discoveries, it could be with a son or a daughter, and they have their partner alongside them for support, for encouragement, to remind them sometimes of what's most important to them. So it really comes down to the family's own, I think, preferences or gut instincts on how they feel and how inclusive they want to be. There's a good one on probate again, Andrew, from Larry is just asking, can you plan to avoid probate? Absolutely. I know that one thing that comes up a lot is, somebody asks what estate planning is, and again, being in this industry over 20 years, I've read and seen and learned a lot of things, but it's estate planning is the art of dying neatly. So it's the less hands that touch your money, much the same as when we're alive, as when we're gone. We want to make things clean and efficient. For some families, they actually are encouraged to go through probate if they have a very complicated matter, different marriages, different again, family dynamics. But for the most part, probate can be avoided, and for the right reasons, meaning to keep it clean, efficient. Whether I have 2 children or 4, if I know where I want my assets to go, there are actually investment vehicles today that allow you to name beneficiaries that specifically avoid probate. And those are offered through insurance companies, and they're called segregated funds. The insurance policies themselves on individuals and corporations can avoid probate, again, by having named beneficiaries. And again, a lot of our the planning work that we do, once we understand what the moving parts are and the assets are, we talk with families about, what the intent or the purpose of those assets. And if we can direct them, obviously, to the named beneficiaries while we're alive, it actually keeps things a lot more efficient than leaving it through the estate.
We had one here. Is it ever too early to start succession? Well, we encounter this a lot where maybe they're younger farmers that have children, 10, 11, 12 years old, who we don't quite know if they're ready to jump into farming yet, and we don't know what their career paths might look like. But the thing about succession planning, if you're doing your succession planning efficiently, it should be a living, working document that can change and be adapted over time. So just because we go down the road of having a succession plan doesn't mean that succession plan has to be set in stone. What we want to do is we want to build a plan that's adaptable, so that as things change with the family scenario, we have the foundations already laid out for a successful transition, but we can adapt and we can implement certain things as things in the family change. So as those children become older, maybe we find out 1, 2, maybe 3 of them are interested in farming. Then we can make sure that we have the doors open for those children. But in terms of is it ever too early to start succession? It's never too early to start, building the foundations of succession. Just because you have a plan in place doesn't mean you have to move ownership today. You can move ownership in the future. And that's something to keep in mind, is succession is more than just the transition of assets. It's about making sure that next generation is ready as a big part of it. So if we know that the next generation is a little younger, or maybe doesn't have all the experience that you would like, what do we need to get them there? Do we need to do some financial training for them? Do we need to start including them in some decisions on the farm, so that we can groom our successors, so that when that time comes and you are ready to step back, that they're better prepared to take over? So in a nutshell, it's never too early to start the discussion, because that doesn't mean you have to start transitioning things today. Did you have one there?
Yeah, there's a few more, but just trying to catch them all. So again, if we missed you, we're trying to roll back and see a few. So we have one from Ken asking, we are cow-calf farmers. We wish to pass on the majority of the farm to one child. The other 2 children we wish to pass on just land. Do the children need to pay capital gains if they don't sell the land? they keep it in the family, or does the capital gains apply only if the land is transferred to a child and they sell it? Thanks for the presentation. So thanks, Ken. Well, it's the capital gain only applies really if there's a disposition. So as we mentioned earlier too, and I know that sometimes it's complicated, but you can roll over. You can, as long as the farm is a qualifying farm property, you can roll it over, you can gift it. You can also transfer it and bump up your cost base to the next generation, and use your exemption on that transfer. Now, if your kids go to do the same thing with their children one day, they can use their exemption if the farm still qualifies to do the same type of treatment, bumping up the cost base, rolling it over to the next generation without taking back any consideration, or again, using up their exemption to create possibly a promissory note. If they go and sell the property, then there's a disposition. That's when the capital gains apply.
Yeah,
Okay.
Something for the next generation to consider is if we pass land to our successors who may not be primarily farming as an occupation, we've got to be careful that we maintain the qualification status of that farm for the next generation. And the CRA does have some specific guidelines around what qualifies as a farm. And even for people who currently own farms, the requirements for qualified farm property changed in 1987. So farms purchased before and farm purchased after fall into different sets of rules. So when we do transition our farms to next generation, we just got to make sure that we are maintaining the qualification status for that next generation. We got a couple of those covered.
I think there was just one about seeing the presentation again, but I think
I think that's been answered. Yeah, so just for anyone that is wondering, that the presentation will be available online on the OFA website after we finish the recording here. I think you just have to log in, and Tom can correct me afterwards if we're wrong here, but I think you just log into the OFA website with your OFA member number, and the presentations are archived there. I think our one from last year is still there as well, so you're welcome to check those out afterwards.
There's a couple direct questions here that look kind of specific, and I don't mind answering those after we're done doing the live Q&A. And it looks like most of the other comments coming in are just thanking us for the practical help. And the last one is, how far ahead do you book consultations from first contact? Again, it's I guess maybe Andrew, you want to, because you
well, it actually changes. So it all depends on how you want to, how quickly you want to move. So for us, we get this question a lot, and it depends on a few things. Where you're located, we do like to try and do the consultation meetings on farm if we can. But if people are comfortable with it, we are open to doing a phone or a Zoom call. It's usually quicker to get in if we go that way. But if you do want to do it in person, we usually come down to, because we work across the province, it's we kind of map out when we're going to be in certain areas, and we try and fit in as many families from that area as we can. So it really depends on where you are and how quickly you would like to meet. If you came to us and said, can we do a consultation next week? If you want to do a Zoom or a virtual one, almost certainly we could do that. If it needs to be in person, it might take another week or two to come to the area. So it honestly depends on where you're situated and how quickly you would like the consultation.
That's fair. I think we got time for maybe one or two more.
Yeah. I
see that. Well, of course, there's a couple more good ones here. Yeah. I will comment to Max though. You know what? The gifting to conservation or land trust. We actually don't do a lot of it. We have been approached by a couple of these land trusts just recently to look at a couple, I guess, deals to vet for farmers. But that isn't something that we do every day. Obviously, our main goal is to try to keep farms and families. I know that when you don't have a succession plan, sometimes some people feel they're out of options. I still feel some of the same things, is that a lot of people still have to know financially what they need from that. And if they don't, obviously, and they want to make a gift, I think that goes back to, again, your family values. But happy to help. There is someone on our team that has a little bit of knowledge on this. So if you want, you can write to us. We can give you a little bit of our understanding of it, but it gets a little bit deeper than I can get into on this webinar today. Yeah, there's one from Jackie just asking, can you explain more about the use of freeze for a corporation to lock in the value before transfer? Absolutely. Great question. I think we'll both have some comments because we've both seen a lot of, I guess, purpose, advantages, and great impacts from that. So many people, when they have a business, or again, we put all of our blood, sweat, and tears into something, it's really hard to know what is the right value to take back, what's the right value to communicate to my kids that I need from this. I think we mentioned it in the presentation day too. The more that we gift, the greater the discrepancy at the estate level. So one of the things I love about the freeze is the generation that's acquired it or built it, the exiting generation can now freeze, almost like taking a picture in that point in time to say, what are my values that we've created here? You can freeze those, and then you've got the time to figure out really how you're going to redeem that. Now, I obviously love to have it so we have clarity for the next generation on what they're going to be responsible for, but it gives us a little bit of sense of purpose too, of what that's of holding some of that value back for some of the what ifs that we get into. What if there was ever a breakdown in the marriage? What if there was ever a potential sale from the next generation? Well, when we have those preferred shares, we actually hold that value. So if there was one of those what ifs, the exiting generation would have to get paid out first. It also gives us, I think, peace of mind knowing that we've got that value in case there was a need for more. Like I think we said in the presentation, we're trying to not have so many moving targets for the next generation. It's great to know, you know what, mom and dad need a minimum of say $50,000 a year, but we try to build in a maximum too, so there's not big surprises for families, because that does create contentious moments. But those frozen preferred shares are your security, they're your value, and you hold on to them until you're either ready to forgive them at the end, or again, use them as to create part of your estate down the road personally. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, to add to that a little bit, a lot of the work that I do is really focused on that next generation and how to bring them in. And oftentimes I get approached by the successes on the farms with Dad's waited 25 years for his ownership to come. I don't want to have to wait 25 years for my own. One of the things about a farm freeze, it kind of draws a line in the sand and gives you a starting point, so that we know that mom and dad are going to hold the value before this. And any growth in the farm after that point can be associated with the next generation. What it does is it shows them there's a path forward. The growth is going to be shared. And what it also does is it incentivizes them to keep the farm growing. So if there's no new value in the farm after that, then it's a smaller piece of ownership for that next generation. So when we look at incentivizing the next generation or making sure that they are prepared to enter the farm, having the freeze can kind of give them a good starting point and show them that there is a path through to ownership in the long run. Colleen's got a purpose. If for planning purposes, can you explain how your services are paid for and give an idea of fee range to manage expectations? You know, and I've seen this question coming a couple of times at the end here, and we always get asked that. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on that a little, Daryl.
Yeah, so the hardest part when we start is everyone looks, sounds, and feels a little bit the same, right? But there's a level of complexity or obviously uniqueness to every family and every farm. And that's really what it works for us, is just it is a bit of a basis of time and complexity. It's what resources do we have to provide to the family, and they're always a little bit different. Is it our legal? Is it our tax planning services? Is it financial? So what we do, to be fair to everyone, is we take a retainer at the beginning that each advisor would contract with each family a little bit differently. And what we would say is we take that retainer so that we know you're committed, and we can start to do this discovery work. And once we've done the discovery and we have this summary discovery meeting with the family, we know enough now about potential expectations, timeline, the financial, viability of the farm. And we can actually, and we know enough of the complexity and the moving parts that we actually provide each family with a scope. Here's the scope of work that we would potentially provide to you, almost like a menu. And then we have a discussion, or we co-create the path forward. And that co-creation really comes down to how the family wants us to spend our time and their money. Because some families are ready to say, you know what, this process could take a year, and it could take 2 or 3 years. Some families move a little different speeds than others. Yeah. To Andy's point, some families want to get the next generation prepared before we actually get into the meat and potatoes of the tax planning work. So again, everyone is a little bit unique to this. The retainer fee, again, is something that we take again to show commitment and to help families get started. We also know that when that starts, people are more committed and engaged in this process. And as you know, because of the level of commitment we need, we want to keep things moving as well. So I hope that helps. And again, we're trying to be fair to everybody with the same process and to give everyone the same chance. So when we go through that intro, we can get into more specifics of what we feel, the scope of that work could look like. But again, it's really hard at the beginning until we know what families and farms that we're dealing with. Location.
Yeah, so we got asked, where are we located in Canada? So our head office is in Peterborough, Ontario, but we we don't spend a lot of time in the office here. Actually, we spend a lot of time on the roads, traveling around, going farm to farm to, wherever the farms are is where our office is. Essentially, we try and do as many of our meetings at the kitchen table with the family to make sure that everyone's comfortable where we're working. It's we understand that the farms are pretty rural, and we try and go to as many of the farms as we can. But our office is in Peterborough, Ontario, but we cover wherever we got to go. Really, is what it comes down to.
So I think that's all the questions we have time for today, folks. I don't know if Andrew, you got any other comments, but
No, I think we've tried to get through as many as we've got here. I know there are still a couple rolling in, but for the sake of time, we do have to stick to the 11:30 deadline here.
if there is anything that has come up that we haven't been able to answer, or it's very specific to your own situation, we're happy to, over the next few days or weeks that come ahead, to try to answer your own specific questions. The other big thing is our email's up there for everyone. It's Daryl@farmlifefinancial.ca, Andrew@farmlifefinancial.ca. I think our number was up there earlier. It's 705-775-8000. But we're happy to take calls, texts, and emails.
Yeah.
And again, the biggest thing for us is we're happy to provide the resources to help families get started with this. Happy to do an intro call or a meeting to hopefully get your family in a good place so we can hopefully figure out the future of your farm. So thanks for attending today, everyone. I appreciate your patience and your understanding, and thanks again.
Yeah, we're going to turn it back over to Tom now. So I think he's got a couple closing remarks for you.
Great. Thank you both very much. Daryl and Andrew, great presentation. Lots of great questions flowing in there. That's a good interaction with our participants. We really appreciate that. Just want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar on succession or transition planning. Hopefully it's helped you to either start or continue or extend your thinking and planning for your own particular farm operation. Just a reminder, as Daryl mentioned, there's a free consultation for OFA members. There's also a 10% discount on fees should you choose to retain Farm Life to help you with your farm succession planning. So on behalf of the OFA Board of Directors and OFA staff, I want to wish you all a very safe and successful season. Hopefully that's not going to be too far away, but that's the nature of farming. So anyway, wish you all very well. Thank you very much for your participation. And as mentioned several times, this will be uploaded to the OFA YouTube channel. When you go on our website, you'll see a link that will carry you there. Now, it will take us a little bit of time to get that, so it won't be up in the next few days. So thank you very much. Have a great day.